Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of Global Pause Rethink the Future. So in this episode we'll be dealing with the good of visibility. So we touched upon that in the last issue, but I feel it's worth kind of exploring it in a little bit more detail to hopefully kind of flesh out some nuances and some potential kind of significance, so we have a better grasp on the issue at hand when we're dealing with, I suppose, the Gordian knot of our civilization, or the ensnarement of ourselves within a consumerist world. So one of the things that really it's pertinent to kind of look at when you're dealing with this thing is that ultimately what we hold out for ourselves is very much conditioned upon the culture in which we find ourselves and how we orientate ourselves towards legitimised activities such as obviously as consumption. So in the last issue we did deal with the nature of intrapersonal exchanges and how that's very much the foundation for any of the stuff that we're really talking about when we're talking about consumerism, because ultimately if you think of that, the preeminent good that you're focused with in your whole life is your time, and so any want satisfaction or any want or exchange is always subordinate or secondary to the overarching good, or that underwrites your consumption, then that means you very much you practice intrapersonal exchanges, which are considered to be, for want of putting it another way, to be autistic. Ludwig von Mises, coined it that way in Human Action. So he described it as being an autistic exchange, which is essentially just an exchange with yourself. But when you do that, when you're having an exchange with yourself, what that does is that very much sows the seeds for the narcissism that is engendered, that we very much can see manifest in the world with social media. So, if you think that, interpersonal exchanges is about the way how that you're securing your timeline, and then, Facebook and Instagram in particular being the most, malevolent, but the most harmful for people's I think Instagram is for people's mental health, and the way how you share yourself. So whether or not I think on Facebook it's, on a timeline, so you're sharing, the ossified remains of your life, or this edit, as it were, that is very much cleansed, or very much you are the producer in your own show reel, as it were. It's this life that is this idealised, as it were. So whether or not there's any kind of authenticity or legitimacy or whatever, it's not really the point. It's the point of, well, why the fuck do we do that anyway? So because you're sharing, you're sharing yourself, your time, and it's the snapshots, those snapshots of a life that are shared. Now, that presupposes, obviously, if you're working back from the legitimised action of that presupposes the intrapersonal exchanges that we practice, not interpersonal exchanges, because a person is always focused on their time. And so now that here we are editing our own lives through sharing it, and through sharing it, it becomes, well, it's a good. So the visibility of your own life, your own story, becomes a good, and a good to share. But you share it through the good of visibility, or the medium of imagery, which is like this. Our sensate culture very much is the one thing that we utilise. It's the most impactful, and our cities are, if we're talking about the way how, the monetization of attention is very much the standard for business, and our cities are rife with advertisements and whatnot. And then personally, we very much mirror the same kind of tactics of that preoccupation. So, but it presupposes the good of visibility and the way how you share yourself. And ultimately, we touched upon this in the last issue, is that the good of visibility is only a good because we are, we're anonymous beings, I should say. We are nobodies to each other. And so as a result of that anonymity, the good of visibility is the flip side to that. And if you can understand that, you can understand why fame is touted now is almost to be, in order to be alive, you have to be seen. And so therefore, to be alive, to embody a life, is to be shared through media. So whether or not it's TikTok or Instagram and all these other things, it's very much saying that is the only way that you can live your life if it ultimately becomes a model for somebody else, because essentially that's what you're doing in the scenario of sharing ourselves through imagery or whatnot. But it presupposes the good of visibility, and which obviously can, if you trace it right back, this extends right back to the Godhead and to the apotheosis of God, or Christ maybe, or if you look at the nimbuses that I think we're very much part of, the way how the apotheosis of the emperors and stuff like that. I mean, there's probably lots of other examples that we can utilise, and I suppose this obviously predates, literacy and everything else like that. So it was very much, but it's funny is that it predates literacy. We've got a culture that is reducing people's attention span, and almost removing kind of critical thinking out of the culture, and so therefore imagery becomes all the more becomes the medium to be utilised all the more readily because of maybe we're removing, people are becoming, I won't say they're becoming illiterate, but they're obviously losing their undermining their ability to make sense of what they see or to navigate themselves in the world. And so therefore, if you're looking at the way how we're navigating ourselves in the world, then the models come to mediate the orientation. And so if we're looking at consumerist culture, then those models are very much predicated. They are a necessity. They are absolutely, they're crucial for the legitimacy of our way of life. So one of the things that when we're looking at the way how you're going to surpass this is by looking at models, because you are looking at the models that are legitimizing. So a classic example is aspirational, branding. Aspirational branding is nothing else than grooming. It's very much, if you look at the tactics, and you look at the tactics for the grooming as far as child, the abuse of children or trying to groom children online, and then you look at some of the tactics as far as grooming the next batch of consumers. There's not that much difference between them. Now, some might say, well, you have a sense of agency as an adult where a child doesn't. But when you are reducing people into their wants, all right, what is a child? A child doesn't know themselves. It only knows what it wants, but it doesn't even know what it wants. It wants what it sees other people desire. So this is very much a Girardian understanding of mimic desire and the triangulation of desire that comes into play. So how can we say that they're any different when our economic paradigm predicates consumption of wants? It reduces our interaction with each other. It's reducing it down to want. We relate to each other through our wants. That's the average relation that we share. And so if we are sharing ourselves through the good of visibility, and we all are orientating ourselves towards, say, visions of the good life that comes to mediate the preoccupation and the mean of our existence through the means-end continuum and the way how money, we equate our time with money, then ultimately when you're looking at the way how you're surpassing it, you are addressing ultimately, I mean, this comes very much down to, well, what's the main focus within, if you're looking at discretionary spending and you're looking at the one part of say the market where this is very much the mainstay of its model, it's fashion. There's a major issue in fashion at the moment, and so we can use fashion as a good way to understand the nature of the good of visibility and the wider problems with consumerism when you're just addressing fashion and fashion alone. So at the moment, you've got these overtures within the fashion industry that's trying to address, sustainability. And so sustainability is always framed like it is with any other industry as far as, whether or not it's the production processes and looking at maybe distribution, maybe looking at community. And if you're looking at community, it's very much defined from a outsourced workforce. And so therefore looking at it from the prism or the frame of some kind of worker rights kind of scenario, and the way how companies in the West or ever in any developed nation can exploit cheap labour. And then maybe lacks kind of ecological kind of oversights and everything else like that. The whole thing about it is that when you're framing sustainability in that manner, it doesn't address what's driving the behaviour of overconsumption as far as apparel goes. And once again, I mean, if you're looking at the interface between the public, when you're putting on your clothes. And this is the one thing which I've said on, I haven't said this in the podcast, but on a few other videos. So classic example is self-referenced appearing. So before you go out in public, like anybody does, that you check yourself out in a mirror. So that mirror becomes a proxy for the public. All right, so because if you didn't give a shit, if the good of visibility was not something that we all believe, or that underwrites it, whether or not you're conscious of it or not, it really doesn't matter whether or not you subscribe to the rule of fashion, or you're a fashionista, or you don't really give a shit about it. It's immaterial. If you are checking yourself out before you go out in public, you are acknowledging the good of visibility. You're acknowledging that your appearance is a good that's removed from yourself. All right, so the interface between the public is something that you reference. That self-reference appearing, which is a form of narcissism, is very much, it's not an acute or pathological one, but it is a form of self-reflection, self-referencing. And so therefore you're never a mystery to yourself, because irrespective of the way how that you might reference yourself in the mirror, you are never that person in the eyes of another person. You're just never that person. You're always a mystery to yourself. But we practice it. The reason why we practice it is because it underwrites our publicness. And so therefore clothes. So you take clothes as a scenario to look at the good of visibility and the interface between the public. You can understand that any overture towards sustainability within the fashion industry, this will not have the impact, because it's not dealing with the good of visibility. And if it's not dealing with the good of visibility, it's not dealing with the nature of the model that they use in order to substantiate consumption and the want of a self that's engendered when the publicness that we share is as nobodies. So the narratives that needs to be created within the fashion industry are ultimately have to be orientated towards the good of visibility or visibility, but understanding that, and then understanding visibility along the lines of seduction, and which is a way how that you are going to not transcend, but you are going to eclipse the model and put into play a different order of appearing. This is the one thing that people do not, and I have had so many, not arguments, but the blind spot is that. But also the other blind spot is the fact that that the relation that you share with other individuals in a market-orientated way of life, everybody is externalised. Average human relations are externalised. But because the convenience of the market is the one thing that we take as a given, we don't consider that to be an externality. When you're looking at it from the aspect of sustainability, it's not considered to be anything. It's not even acknowledged to be an issue. So how can you address sustainability when you're dealing with the good of visibility in fashion when it doesn't acknowledge that we externalise human relations for the sake of our wants, and by doing that we engender a want of a self, and by engendering a want of a self we will legitimise the model that comes to mediate our preoccupation to such that when we are in our holding pattern of consumption, one of the legitimised activities that we do is to fashion the self to share as an offering, as a religious, almost like a religious offering, because our consumption is a ritual. So how can they ever approach the impasse of consumerism, of sustainability, when they don't even acknowledge that? They don't acknowledge it as a mean of our existence. And so the only way that you can overcome you've got to start from the most forms of consumption that is very much like fast fashion, as it were. You start with those models of consumption that is very much, and there is a slight shift, I suppose, with the global pause that you can see now. But if you start to approach consumption, so dealing with a business model that is very much predicated on cycling and the velocity of consumption. Now, if you can engender the narrative, and this relates to the kind of branding that really needs to occur in order for companies to start to differentiate themselves and to start to actually open up the conversation about the velocity of consumption, but that will then engender that conversation into other areas of the economy. Because once again, if consumption is a leisure activity and is a pastime, then ultimately having a conversation about one of the mainstays of a consumerist culture being apparel is going to open up the nature of consumption into other areas of the economy. So we have to kind of bear that in mind, that when we're looking at how we can engender surpassing the impasse that we've obviously accepted for ourselves. And it very much obviously relates to you as an individual and the exceptions that you make, but then it also relates to what business, if they are, the thing about it is that businesses are run by people that share the same concerns as you and I. So it's whether or not they can see beyond. This is the one thing which I always like to think of it, is that if business only considers themselves to be a money-making enterprise and don't consider the business to be an enterprise, which is by default a complex kind of undertaking that requires the cooperation of a multitude of participants, and if we're heading towards a kind of cooperative kind of ethos, then it's really incumbent upon business to start to take ownership of the business or the model of consumption that they very much substantiate. Now, even if you are what you would spruik to be a sustainable brand as far as apparel goes. As far as that, all your clothes that you sell or that you make have sustainability woven into them. So you're looking at obviously the reduction of ecological practices as well, and all these other things that make it. Maybe they've been audited by these third-party organisations and whatnot, so therefore they've got credibility as far as their marketing goes. But if they don't address the good of visibility and what underwrites consumption, how sustainable are they? Because they very much, there's nothing wrong. So the thing about it is that fashion can be used to enchant, but it's not. It can't be used. It's not used to enchant. The conversation, the narrative of clothes is something that could be a lot deeper, that relates to a different order, a world order that is removed from the model. And any company that starts to appreciate that will start to shift it and start to engage a conversation with women primarily. It's not, but primarily women, in a way where they're going to engendering something that this is not there. So I thought that, looking at the good of visibility is just through the prism of clothes is a good way to understand that, the model of the good life and people that come to model that good life, and the way how aspirational branding is engendered to groom consumption, all conspires to subordinate ourselves ultimately Because one of the things that, when you're looking at the way how, the mean of your existence, if you're always orientated towards your time and the means and continuum, and you're securing your time as a supplement, and then the visions that you hold out yourself to realise are sums that you are visions that you are working towards. Well, in the mean of your existence, you're subordinating yourself to that vision. What is aspirational branding other than basically that? It's very much, and we all, to a degree, irrespective of whether or not it's just looking at apparel, or you're looking at the way how you're going to subordinate yourself to a vision that you hold out for yourself, and depending on the nature of whether or not it's unrealistic or not, there is a certain amount of subordination and devaluing of the mean of your existence. That is very much something that we take as a given when we are always orientated towards our time and we don't look beyond it. So I just feel that there's something that we can kind of reflect upon, and hopefully, if this resonates with you, when you're out in the public, you can kind of maybe look at the world with fresher eyes. So until next time, take care. Thank you.